Shalom everybody and welcome back to another update from Alma Center. I'm Avraham Levine and this is Ibrahim Abu Ahmad. Another update about, I think, a different angle that was less shared in media about the explosion in Beirut Tuesday last week. So essentially we put out there articles about what we know about the explosion. We still don't know what exploded or who's to blame. We put out there articles about the Nasrallah's speech. We sent a newsletter to all of our followers summing up the whole week. Ibrahim, what's so important that is we're putting there another update out there? What were we missing last week that we're going back to last week again?
First of all, thank you, and welcome to everyone who's listening to us. I think, I was given sort of the task to write about the humanitarian aspect of the explosion in Beirut, and to talk about, because everybody was talking about Hezbollah, Nasrallah's speech, is Hezbollah to blame or not to blame, the tactical part, where does this...
Gas or missiles, ammonia, ammonium nitrate.
Is the government involved? Is it aware of it? Is it not aware of it?
Conspiracies galore.
And everybody kind of forgot about the people aspect, that we have about 250,000 people who are without homes. And the task I was given was to write something about it. And to tell you the truth, after finishing about a couple pages, it was just words for me. And I just wanted to look people in the eye and try to share what actually happened there, what is the desperation of the people, to add some videos into that, which you'll see while we're talking about, certain aspects that led us to the situation where we are at today. And I think that, words speak louder than us speaking is going to speak louder than just me writing a text.
Another article, another post.
Another post, hoping for people
numbers.
to write and to read and to actually, get in depth of what we're discussing. And I think these kind of things can happen much easier way in this. And essentially to explain to people why, at least in the eyes of the Lebanese and also in the eyes of a lot of people now, the Beirut explosion is Lebanon's 9/11.
You got to clarify that. You have to. 9/11 was, World Trade Center 2001. Way larger impact. Just looking at it from the outside, simple numbers. You have to explain why the explosion last week. Not underestimating it, but why is that the equivalent of 9/11 in your eyes?
Yeah, and I'm also not trying to underestimate the 9/11 incident at all. It's one of the worst catastrophes we've seen in our recent history, and it's not a comparison between the two events. It's only to understand the magnitude of the catastrophe in Lebanon itself. The reason why we're calling it Lebanon's 9/11, or we're trying to put that kind of similarity in a way, it's not because of the actual explosion. It's not about the numbers of people who died, which is actually very lucky that we ended in less than
It could have been much worse.
It could have been much worse than a couple
worse.
hundreds.
Right.
It looked a lot worse than a couple hundred deaths. But the magnitude of the explosion is actually not the actual explosion. It's that everything that happened before the explosion, leading up in about 2-3 years of events, of things that happened on the ground, of changes that happened in Lebanon, and the continuing collapsing economy, collapsing socially the country is at a chaos, economically and politically, and it has been dragging for 3 years.
Let's put it out there. Is this the last straw?
It looks that way. From the type of protests that we're seeing on the streets today in Lebanon, we are not in the protests that were there in last October.
So what's the difference if we're looking at the demonstrations? We've seen demonstrations for months against the government. What's the difference? Because we saw all these demonstrations, nothing happened. A week of demonstrations, and the government resigned 2 days ago. What's the difference? What did you see today that we didn't see March, April, May?
I think the biggest difference is the desperation. The people have reached a level of desperation that we did not see in the October protests. People went against the government and they were demanding a change after the WhatsApp tax, which everybody heard about a lot. The government tried to find a way to improve its economic
Right, mostly economics.
And now, I mean, just think about it this way: a lot of these people don't have homes to go back to. I mean, they are literally in the streets. So if I'm in the streets and I'm in such a state of fury, when you see a country that it's in corruption for years and it's just dragging on and on,
you got nothing to
the
lose.
economy is collapsing more and it just keeps sinking even lower. You have nothing to lose. You're already in the streets without a shelter, so you're gonna stay there and you're gonna voice your voice. And with the frustration that the people are feeling now, we've seen hundreds of people going to almost every single ministry in Beirut,
one by one,
and literally try to force their way in.
Right.
Damaging property, throwing documents off the windows.
The army has to retake back the control over these ministries.
And it's only because they feel like every single time you're doing new elections, you're trying to ask for an improvement or a change even in the electoral system, that it's a very sectarian one, and each one of the religions gets a certain number of seats and certain positions of power, and people are tired of it. And it's going back and forth, and when you do a new election, you're back with the same people, with the same figures, same political heads that have not changed in the past 20 years.
More blaming of Hezbollah now, put out there direct.
And definitely the one aspect that is different from the last protests, which everybody went against the government, in February, after the government after the protests in October, the government resigned, and then they tried to form a new government.
Right.
And that's when Hezbollah kind of filled the void, and they
from May to October, it took months to create this.
it took about 9 months to create a government. In 2018, it was about 9 months that they were trying to form a government. A government was formed at the end of January 2019, and then it only lasted less than a year. The people went to the streets because the government went about it the wrong way to try to find a revenue. And it was taxing the people on WhatsApp calls, which was one of the only free things that people could use in such a collapsing economy. And the government did not realize the magnitude of that act. People protested, and then Hezbollah filled the void. Hassan Diab was a Hezbollah figurehead, exactly. He is the one who took control of the government. Most of the new government was supportive of Hezbollah, so they had an actual monopoly over the government at that point. And from that point on, up to the explosion itself, I mean, we saw the Caesar Act, which is an American sanctions against any businesses working with the Syrian government,
or Hezbollah,
and the terrorist organizations, and that damaged a lot of Lebanese banks that work with Hezbollah itself, and even like businesses that work with Syria and in Syria and importing to Syria. So it damaged, it even worsened the economic situation even more. But when the explosion happened, people were finally able to say, and literally put the blaming finger on Hezbollah, because for the Lebanese people, it really did not matter who was responsible for the explosion physically, what was the mistake,
it's the
whose missiles are there, it became irrelevant. Everyone knows that Hezbollah controls the port, both the naval port and the sea port, the airport, and it's their responsibility at the end of the way, no matter what, and no matter who actually is the one who caused this.
But I don't think they'll be, those fingers I don't think will be pointed directly after the investigation. I don't know.
And this is another thing that we're seeing right now from the people. They're asking for an investigation, and of course, Lebanon still has its Hezbollah supporters within the government, within the country, particularly in southern Lebanon.
Shiites.
The majority of the Shiite population, but there are still cells of Shiites that are opposing of Hezbollah, and particularly when the explosion happens in Beirut, and a bit far from south of Beirut, where most of the Shiite population is at,
right.
The people who were damaged more were the Sunni and the Christian populations, and they are the ones who are calling in louder voices than ever before. We want an investigation. We're looking for an international investigation that will also prevent Hezbollah from interfering in that kind of investigation. And that's something that we did not see in the past. I mean, UNIFIL has been working in Lebanon since the Second Lebanese War. Nobody demanded vocally on the street, we want UNIFIL to, act more aggressively against Hezbollah. And this is the first time they're looking for a national force to come in and make a change.
Yeah, maybe even more pressure. Macron, I think, from France, said we should use UNIFIL, more aggressively. It might make a change also on that angle.
And also, don't forget the fact that in this protest, in this call for change, we're seeing a lot more celebrities and public figures within Lebanon that are also chanting those voices and calling Nasrallah by name. That has never been the case before. I mean, LBC, which is the leading media outlet in Lebanon, stated publicly that they're going to stop showing Nasrallah's speeches, which is unheard of. This is something in that magnitude, going in public media to everyone. That's not something we've seen before. Celebrities, and actually mostly the women. Models, designers, and leading women within politics.
That's Lebanon.
And yes,
liberal Lebanon with women going up front and younger people, older people. It's not
exactly, and standing, calling by name to Nasrallah to stop, in their words, cut the bullshit.
طب أنا عندي سؤال، يعني نصر الله شو طالع يقلنا بعد اللي صار؟ شو بده يقلنا؟ شو عنده شيء يقلنا إياه؟ بده يقلنا إنه هو موجود ليحمينا من إسرائيل؟ بده يرجع يطلع يقلنا هيدا الشيء؟ طيب يا سيد عنا سؤال، إسرائيل كل شيء عملته فينا، كبت علينا قنبلة نووية، كل شيء عملته فينا هاي الدولة المجرمة العدوة اللي بهويتها هي عدوة لإلنا، عملت فينا اللي انتو عملتوه فينا.
The people got sick of Nasrallah speaking again and again, avoiding any blame, saying we have nothing to do with the port. Everyone knows that Hezbollah.
Well, even Hassan Diab, not mentioning Hezbollah with names, but saying essentially corruption was greater than us, and that's what exploded in the port. And I think he put it out there nicely.
Right. I mean, if you want to look at the corruption, I mean, like we said, it's years of corruption. It's years of the same people in government. It's years of collapsing economy, and you see no change in sight.
So you're not optimistic.
I am not optimistic because when people went into these ministries and try to take off, destroy, literally like ruining the ministries, it's such an act of aggression that you're reaching a state of anarchy at some point. And we've never seen that particularly in Lebanon. I can tell you the first flashback that I got from those protests and seeing the documents flying in the streets of Lebanon, of Beirut, it actually reminded me of the Israeli embassy in Egypt. Because I was near there when they threw the papers from the embassy, like when they walked into the embassy and threw documents, embassy documents all over, like from the windows. And that's a state that I've never seen that, in the context of Lebanon.
So Lebanon, we've spoken about. I think Hezbollah's base is still pretty strong, meaning we don't see. Everything's centered in Beirut. The base of Hezbollah in the south, the Shia base is, we don't see not protests, not much against Hezbollah in the south. We don't see many Shiites in the demonstrations in Beirut. It's still mostly the Sunnis, the Christians. So it seems like although Lebanon is weaker and weaker, and even though Hezbollah might be to blame, Hezbollah, I think, is holding on to its status, maybe even gain strength in the situation where the government is getting weaker, quits, and Hezbollah is still holding on.
Right. I mean, first of all, of course, like when all the government at one, announces its resignation, it definitely weakens the position of the state. But when you see the puppet image of Nasrallah with a hanging rope around its neck in the middle of Beirut, that's an unprecedented image. That speaks louder than anything the frustration of the people. When you go on social media, and something that I've been looking at today, they're actually also using a tactic that is very well known by Hezbollah. You know, when, for instance, with the last Hezbollah martyr, the one that died in the alleged Israeli attack in Syria,
Right, well,
everybody posted, so many images and pictures of his family,
his mother,
his younger brother, and basically the supporters of Hezbollah demanded Hezbollah itself to act,
to
retaliate. And today you see videos of, there was an image of a video of this guy who was playing with his son who died from the explosion when the explosion reached to the hospital in Beirut because he was waiting for his wife. His wife was having a baby, their second baby, and he died while his wife was giving birth. And everybody's like reposting
That's
that.
what we're
Everybody
seeing
is putting, we're seeing a tactic to kind of awaken the emotions of the Lebanese and basically put them in a more active position that we've seen in the past, trying to stir the emotions and putting the emotions onto the streets. And this is the difference. The desperation level that the people have reached in Lebanon is unprecedented, and it voices concern. Like you said, Hezbollah as an organization is it has its own structure, it's well managed, well led, while the opposers of Hezbollah have no leadership.
It's a separate economy, pretty much. It's independent from all these.
A state within a state.
Exactly.
And the opposers, on the other hand, have no leadership, and they don't have a set of specific aims. That's why we're seeing anarchy instead of actual acts. That's only led because of people's frustration and inability to do any real change. One of the things that we need to see on the ground is a new leadership. Someone who can take all these people and lead them to a new path. Maybe it can be an external force, like they're expecting Macron to do. I don't know if he is willing or can, but people are expecting someone to take the.
I think that sums it up well. I think I think Lebanon needs a leader, a stronger government, and support from outside. I don't think they can do it on their own. They're not accepting any help from Israel, of course. They declined everything, but maybe from Europe, other strong powers. I think that's a combination that could start something.
Right. I mean, like you said, while Iran is giving already its support and bringing shipments, and one of the biggest security concerns is what kind of shipments are they bringing? Is it only humanitarian, or are they masquerading humanitarian to bring in more military aid?
That's why
I'm looking. You would expect a balancing force to provide humanitarian aid to strengthen the position of maybe pro-West tendencies, you might call it. Maybe from Saudi Arabia at least, from the strong Gulf governments. We need to see it actively and also on social media more, because this is the tool of the day is Twitter in Lebanon and Facebook. This is the tool. And even if these governments are giving any kind of aid, if it's not publicized enough, it's as if never happened.
Right.
And definitely with a civilian population that will look for any kind of hope, definitely in a population like the Lebanese population, which is for the Christian and the Sunni population has a very liberal tendencies. They're looking to have some backing from the West, and if they're not going to get it, they're going to be on their own in this.
It might turn
in clash against Hezbollah. It's either Hezbollah will remain a status quo. They're going to chant for a couple of weeks, silenced, and we're going to have new elections with the same sectarian election that has been done for the past couple of decades. And we're going to see it again and again, and nothing will happen. Or people are actually going to clash against Hezbollah. Hezbollah will win because they are much more structured.
They're an army.
You never know. They're actually an army. Unless another army intervenes, which it's a very unlikely
we hope we hope that it won't go to a complete civil war.
This country has known civil war. Lebanon has known civil war,
That's the
and it was a
greatest
sectarian
threat.
civil
That's
war.
the greatest threat in Lebanon would be civil war.
Right, and that's something that the protesters themselves are trying to avoid. And the fact that they're calling for eliminating sectarianism, they're, in a sense, it looks like they're trying to say that Hezbollah is to blame, and not as a Shiite, but as a terror organization. The chance of Hezbollah Irhabi, terrorist, Hezbollah's terrorists, that's something that you didn't see in the past. But also it tried to not to direct the blame on Shiites as Shiite population, but as Hezbollah as a terrorist organization.
Keeping the people still together so they can keep on living as one state.
We hope so. I mean, the situation there is dire, and our thoughts and prayers are, of course, with the people of Beirut, the over 250,000 people without homes. Horrific videos of families that have lost their loved ones. There are more of people that need surgeries, and so many donation pages that have been opened to donate for this person or another, for
blood banks.
People who had previous problems and now they are accelerating because of the explosion. I mean, people are desperate. And this is the reason why we're doing this, because I wanted to look to people in the eye and try to understand.
This is how bad.
This is how bad it is, and it's not only about the tactical part of Hezbollah or is it not Hezbollah. What are the missiles? Who's responsible? Just take a moment to understand why people are magnifying this event to the level of 9/11, which is something that is like you said, it's not even the same numbers, but like the fact that you have a collapsing economy for years, failing governments for years, and inability to change anything, and going back to the same status quo again and again and again, had led people to the feeling of desperation and that there is no hope. And those really horrific feelings is something that you can associate with 9/11's explosion. Definitely when 9/11 happened by a terrorist organization, and this not by a terrorist organization, but if you ask the Lebanese public, the ones who are opposing Hezbollah, they'll tell you they are to blame.
Thank you, Ibrahim.
Thank you.
We'll end with that note. If you have any more questions, feel free to send us the questions and follow the rest of the things we put out there about Lebanon. It's not always about the tactical and strategies of Israel against Lebanon. Sometimes it's just about the story of the people. Be safe, be good. Shalom from Allah.